All right, welcome to the Young Turks. Cenk, Uygur, and Kasparian with you guys. I'm in a mood today, so I'm going to obliterate Donald Trump on a couple of these stories. And as usual, progressives are attacked in the presidential campaign. We will explain the full context. I've yet to see one attack piece on Kamala Harris or Beto O'Rourke or Kirsten Gillibrand or Cory Booker. Not one, not one. Mainstream media, I just can't seem to find their accountability backbone when it comes to establishment candidates. Not one, not one. But when it comes to Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Tulsi Gabbard, one after another, after another, after another. So we'll get into that a little bit later in the program too, and you can tell where I'm gonna go with that. But first we're gonna start with Trump. You miss any part of the show, you're crazy. Become a member, tyt.com/join. Don't miss any of it, because there'll be a lot of fun later in the program, but will there? But also a significant amount of rage today. All right, let's get going.
All right. The New York Times published an explosive piece indicating that the FBI did open a counterintelligence investigation into the President of the United States following his decision to fire James Comey. Now, there were other reasons for this counterintelligence investigation, and it also had to do with what Trump had to say in an interview with Lester Holt.
Did you ask for a recommendation?
What I did is I was going to fire Comey. My decision. It was not.
You had made the decision before they came in the room.
I was going to fire Comey. And in fact, when I decided to just do it, I said to myself, I said, you know, this Russia thing with Trump and Russia is a made-up story. It's an excuse by the Democrats for having lost an election.
Okay, so the fact that he fired Comey and the statements that Trump had made during that interview convinced FBI officials to open this counterintelligence investigation into Donald Trump, and we didn't learn about that until recently.
So I just want to give two pieces of context before Anna gives you more of the information. The FBI does two types of investigations: criminal investigations and counterintelligence operations, to make sure that someone in our government, almost never the president, but now we're in a unique situation, is not working with a foreign government for a number of reasons. In this case, they combined both of those investigations because of possible obstruction of justice and because they were now officially worried that Donald Trump might be an agent of a different government, in this case, Russia. And there was actually 5 different reasons why. The Comey firing was just the straw that broke the camel's back as to starting an official investigation. They were concerned all the way dating back to the campaign for reasons that we'll explain here.
Yeah. I mean, the 2 reasons that I outlined were the factors that finally pushed them over the edge, because there was a huge debate among FBI officials as to whether or not it made sense to open a counterintelligence investigation into the President of the United States. That's unprecedented. And so finally they're like, okay, I mean, there are too many factors here that make us suspicious about Trump's ties to Russia. So according to the Times, counterintelligence investigators had to consider whether the president's own actions constituted a possible threat to national security. Agents also sought to determine whether Mr. Trump was knowingly working for Russia or had unwittingly fallen under Moscow's influence. So they didn't know whether Trump was knowingly involved with Putin, working in Russia's favor against the best interests of the United States, or if he was just unwittingly doing Putin's bidding because he had been influenced.
Both are incredibly possible, because I think that after dealing with the president for some time, they realized the man is one of the least intelligent people we've ever met. So could he accidentally be a dupe for Putin? Yeah, he could be a dupe for anyone because he's a dupe. But in this case, I tend to think that it's much more active and for reasons that we'll get into.
Now, Trump was also quoted as saying what I'm about to tell you after he had fired Comey. And this is relevant because he was actually speaking to Russian officials in the Oval Office following Comey's firing. And he said, quote, "I just fired the head of the FBI. He was crazy, a real nut job. I faced great pressure because of Russia. That's taken off."
Okay, see, that's even more devastating than the video you just saw of him on NBC. So they're inside the Oval Office talking to Russian officials, and he assures the Russians, don't worry, the pressure's off on the Russia situation. What are you doing? Are you nuts? I mean, it goes both to being complicit with the Russians and being deeply unintelligent. If he was like some sort of secret agent man that had any kind of savvy at all, you wouldn't say that in the Oval Office, you schmuck. But he's too stupid, so he's like, don't worry, guys. Russia's my best friends. Don't worry, I took the pressure off. I fired the guy who was investigating us, me and you. I fired him, don't worry. How is that not collusion? I mean, look, guys, I think whether you're right wing and there's some left wingers that are still holding on to this idea that, oh golly gee, this is all innocent. Man, take your blinders off, man. If any president tells any foreign government, let alone an adversary in the Oval Office, oh, don't worry, I fired the head of the FBI because he was looking into your government and me. You did what? What? That's crazy. So should you investigate that? You should be fired if you don't investigate that. Look, now let me explain the other factors, but this is plenty enough. So during the campaign, first of all, they see, well, the guy won't say anything negative about Putin or Russia and keeps giving him incredible praise. That alone would not be anywhere near sufficient. You could argue for allies like Israel, every candidate does that. Flowery praise of whether their government is left wing or right wing, etc. So it's a small data point. Then they move on to, well, they weirdly, now this is a real thing, they weirdly changed the platform, the Republican Party platform, to be more pro-Russian. Well, that's gratuitous, and we all saw that in public. We commented about it on the Young Turks as it was happening. We're like, wow, that is brazen. You're being accused of, even at the time we knew that they had connections, some connections to Russia, and Trump weirdly on the campaign is like, Putin is great, he's wonderful, he's so strong, right? And then all of a sudden they changed the platform to make it pro-Russian. That's a huge red flag, in this case, almost literally, okay? And then, so then there's the Steele memo. And you can say Steele memo is uncorroborated, and that's true. Some parts of it have now been proven to be correct. But at the time, it's a small data point. I wouldn't take that, and I didn't at the time take it too seriously. Now I take it a lot more seriously because a bunch of stuff in there that seemed crazy or outlandish were proven correct. So okay, but that's just another data point. But to me, the absolute one that put it over the top is he has 4 different people working on his campaign deeply connected to the Russians. That is massively weird. Look, I did a video over the weekend and used this example, but you could fill in the blanks on any of them. If Obama had 4 different people working on his campaign that were all connected to the Iranian government and the Grand Ayatollah, would that be a red flag? Of course. They'd be like, why does Obama have 4 staffers who are getting paid or are connected to the Grand Ayatollah, who is an adversary of ours? In this case, take out Mullah, put in oligarch, take out their leaders and put in the Khomeini, I guess, and put in Putin, right? And that's the same exact situation. So the FBI is like, wait, and they still didn't investigate. They still didn't open a counterintelligence investigation into Trump. Then he becomes president. Then he's like, oh, Comey's looking into the Russians, I fire him. Then he goes on TV and says, I fired him because he was looking into the Russians. Then he brings the Russians in and says, don't worry, I fired him. If you don't start an investigation as to whether he's working with the Russians at that point, you are not doing your job.
Right.
People are saying that this is debatable. It's unprecedented, that's definitely true. But we've never had another situation where the president of the United States might be so deeply immoral and corrupt that he's working for a foreign government. But it is not debatable. You'd be crazy not to open an investigation with this fact pattern on any president.
And it's not just about Trump's complimentary, tone when it comes to dealing with Putin. It's not just about the fact that he had all of these campaign officials deeply tied with Russia. There was that huge story that broke last week involving Paul Manafort and how he had handed over campaign data, polling data to Russian officials. But it's also the fact that Trump's policies toward Russia are very different from previous policies. So for instance, the White House following Trump's election was much more favorable to Russia and its annexation of Crimea, whereas the Obama administration imposed some pretty strong sanctions against Russia for doing that. And so it's about Trump's actions, not just his words. His words give you a clue into what motivated his policy decisions toward Russia.
So look, let's look at the Crimea example, because he's done a number of things that are considered pro-Russian, but some are debatable. So he wants to withdraw from Syria, but to be fair to him, he said that during the campaign that he wanted to withdraw overall from the Middle East. And I think there's an argument to be made that we agree with on withdrawal. That doesn't mean he's doing it for the right reasons. He might be doing it because he's in bed with the Russians, but I'm giving you that as, hey, no, that one's debatable, right? And there are others that you can say are debatable. Maybe he's obsessed with destroying NATO because they're not, in his mind, paying their bills. It could be. I think that's less debatable, but all right. But randomly turning around and saying, oh yeah, Crimea, that belongs to Russia.
Yeah.
There's no logical explanation for that. Now, if you said, hey, he's not willing to go to war over Crimea, okay, totally fine, different conversation. He's not willing to ruin our relationship with Russia and working on other projects, okay, we're having a conversation. But gratuitously saying, well, they probably should have annexed it, that's against all US foreign policy. It's irrational, it makes no sense. He wouldn't put the sanctions into place until he was absolutely forced to. Come on, guys, you gotta be blind, deaf, and dumb here not to realize there's something special going on here. But the last one, and it's a different story, and we'll cover it as well, and don't miss that one. But now the Washington Post reporting that whenever he goes to talk to Putin, he takes away the notes of the interpreters and won't have anyone else in the room. Oh yeah, the presidents never do that. Gee, I wonder if there's a special relationship that Trump has with Putin that he doesn't want anybody else to find out about. When he says to the interpreter, you better not share anything you have, here, give me your goddamn notes. Gee, I wonder if he says something to Putin that he doesn't want anybody else to find out. Now, if you're saying you still don't believe there's a connection between Trump and the Russians, you're just choosing to be completely biased for whatever reason, because that's what you believed in the past, and I'm gonna hold on to it for dear life. The guy clearly is connected to Putin. I don't know what the exact contours of the deal are. I'm not sure anyone does, but there's a goddamn deal. It's clear as day. If you're trying to avoid it, it's your problem, and you will not face the obvious facts.
Right, and in addition to Trump saying that Russia is essentially, or was essentially, entitled to annexing Crimea, he's also repeatedly attacked NATO and NATO allies, and NATO is a form of defense against Russia, essentially. And so all of these things, when you put them together, kind of draws a narrative that he is deeply tied to Russia. We don't know exactly why or how, but that's how this all appears. And by the way, we don't know what the findings of this counterintelligence investigation were or are. We have no idea. That was not outlined in the Times piece. So what you're gonna hear over and over again from Trump and his allies is that, oh, they didn't find anything. No, that's not true. The Times didn't report anything about the outcome of the investigation. I mean, this is something that we'll find out in the future. Now, with that said, Trump did appear on Jeanine Pirro's Fox News show, and he was asked about this counterintelligence investigation. Here's what he had to say.
Are you now, or have you ever worked for Russia, Mr. President?
I think it's the most insulting thing I've ever been asked. I think it's the most insulting article I've ever had written. And if you read the article, you'd see that they found absolutely nothing. But the headline of that article, it's called The Failing New York Times for a reason. They've gotten me wrong for 3 years. They've actually gotten me wrong for many years before that. But you look at what's going on. I fired James Comey. I call him Lion James Comey because he was a terrible liar, and he did a terrible job as the FBI director. Look at what happened with Hillary Clinton and the emails and the Hillary Clinton investigation, one of the biggest screw-ups that anybody's ever seen as an investigation. And what happened after I fired him, Andrew McCabe, Peter Strzok, his lover, Lisa Page, they did it, and they're all gone.
So he doesn't answer the question. Like he says that he's offended. It's such an offensive thing to ask him. But he doesn't really answer the question. He immediately deflects by mentioning FBI officials and the former FBI counsel who were not fans of Trump, but who also were not fans of Hillary Clinton. He keeps latching on to the fact that they had exchanged text messages that were critical of Trump, but the fact that they were critical of Trump never was involved in the actual investigation of Trump or collusion or potential ties to Russia.
So it might be that his lawyers have pounded into his head the last couple of months, the last couple of years. Hey, if you actually did something, do not strongly deny it on the record because it'll come back to bite you. So in this case, he didn't deny it. He just said, oh, I find it offensive that you would ask. Okay, so now, I mean, look, we have a child for a president. I call him lying James Comey.
It's very clever.
Yeah, what is that? What is that? I mean, if you're on a campaign trail and you think it's a populist thing to do, et cetera, okay, that's one thing. You're already president of the United States. I call the former FBI director lying James Comey, because that's really clever. No, it's not. No, it's not. That means you're a goddamn moron. Like, I call him lying James Comey like a third grader. And you know, they call it the failing New York Times. No, nobody calls it that except you. I have a bone to pick with New York Times on different biases that they have that are actually pro-conservative. Yes, your head can go ahead and explode if you're a conservative. Oh, no way, man, they like gay people, they're so liberal. I got it. I'm not gonna get into that. But look at this child. Are you a Russian agent, Mr. President? I call him lying James Comey, the failing New York Times. Answer a serious question on an incredibly serious topic.
I want to go to the next video because he makes a claim here that I think is important to address and debunk. Take a look.
If you ask the folks in Russia, I've been tougher on Russia than anybody else, probably any other president, period. But certainly the last 3 or 4 presidents, modern day presidents, nobody's been as tough as I have from any standpoint, including the fact that we're doing oil like we've never done it. We're setting records in our country with oil and exporting oil and many other things. So, which is obviously not great for them because that's where they get their money for the most part.
So Trump argues that he is tougher on Russia than any other president, except, and this is according to the Washington Post, Trump has dismissed Russia's election interference as a hoax, suggested that Russia was entitled to annex Crimea in Ukraine, repeatedly attacked NATO allies, resisted efforts to impose sanctions on Moscow, and begun to pull US forces out of Syria. So look, again, as Cenk had mentioned earlier in the story, Trump has been wanting to pull troops out of Syria, so we'll give him that. But all the other decisions by Trump suggest that he is not tough on Russia. He's the exact opposite.
Yeah, he says these outlandish things. The Senate passed that resolution 98-2 to put sanctions on Russia. And Trump said, I don't want to sign it. All right, I have to sign it. And then he refused to enforce it for a long time until he just was not remotely legally permissible anymore to not enforce it. And finally, begrudgingly, and again, he's so unintelligent that he says it in public. I don't want to do this. I think these sanctions are a bad idea on Russia. Poor Russia. I don't know why we're doing this to Russia, but okay, fine, I guess I'm gonna have to do it. Hey, if you want to make it seem like you're not in bed with Russia, you might pretend that you were in favor of the sanctions, but he's too stupid to do that. So, I've been the toughest ever on Russia. Based on what, you child? So, look, I don't know that, like I said now, we're clear on the facts. Do I know, I don't know the exact details of what deal he might have with the Russians. But I'll be honest with you, I get frustrated with the left wing. Right wing, I get it, they're MAGA. You put on that red hat, that means you stop thinking. And you don't care about facts or logic or reason, right? But some of the left wing, well, that means that we can't concentrate on Medicare for all. Really? That's so hard? Like, okay, Trump might have been working with the Russians and we must pass Medicare for all right now. Wow, I just did it. Oh my God, I must be a genius. No, you could do both things at once. I also don't agree with the establishment who's like, hey, listen, we got to focus all of our energy on Trump and Russia, so we can't do Medicare for all. No, that makes no logical sense. You can do both. It's not an either or proposition. So anyone who can't see it, this connection is trying super hard not to see it. And yes, that means you're totally biased.
So the reaction from Trump's administration was swift. A number of his officials did appear on various cable news shows or network shows over the weekend. Mike Pompeo happened to be one of those officials, and he was tight-lipped about the recent New York Times article regarding Trump being investigated by the FBI in the form of a counterintelligence investigation because there was some concern that Trump is possibly working in the best interests of Russia over the best interests of the United States. So what did Pompeo have to say in response to all of this? Check it out.
What is your reaction to this?
I'm not going to comment on New York Times stories, but I'll certainly say this, the notion that President Trump is a threat to American national security is absolutely ludicrous.
Just to clarify, since you were CIA director, did you have any idea that this investigation was happening?
Margaret, I've answered this question repeatedly, indeed, on your show. The idea that's contained in the New York Times story that President Trump was a threat to American national security is silly on its face and not worthy of a response.
Okay, so the investigation aside, Trump is a threat to national security. He's a threat to national security at this very moment, with Russia not even involved. I'm not even considering Russia. We have a government shutdown right now, and we have TSA agents calling in sick in record numbers because they're not getting paid for their jobs. That is a national security concern. So yes, he's a threat to national security. But once you couple that with the fact that Trump is potentially looking out for the best interests of Russia because he could potentially have some sort of deal with them, yes, he's a national security risk. And Pompeo's smart in not elaborating further because he probably doesn't want to incriminate himself.
100%. When you hear someone not address the actual question and they just say, oh, that's ridiculous, that means I do not want to be put on the record denying this, because it likely is very, very much true. Because she asked a specific question. She didn't repeat her earlier question. She said, you were the CIA director, so you would know if that came across your desk. So did it come across your desk? Well, I answered this before. No, you didn't. She asked about when you were CIA director. You know, the idea is that Trump would be a national security danger is ludicrous. She didn't ask that. She asked, did you see that investigation when you were CIA director? And he didn't answer that question because he doesn't want to answer that question because likely he did see it. And so these guys like Pompeo, look, in terms of Rex Tillerson, I think that he was in one of those Putin meetings, the one in Hamburg. They sat there and Tillerson was the only one allowed other than the interpreter. So a lot of these, and then he eventually got super mad at Trump. And I think that he's worried that Trump incriminated him. And now he's got significant legal liability, right? But every one of these guys is in that situation. Pompeo, if he saw the report saying Trump might be a Russian agent and he was a CIA director and he ignored it, and then he became a Secretary of State, well then what is Pompeo? And so that's why when he's on TV, he's like, oh, ridiculous, ludicrous, just don't ask me again. Whatever you do not ask me again, because I will not answer on the record. Okay, I got it.
And finally, Kellyanne Conway also addressed the New York Times report. Here's what she had to say.
It sort of confirms what the president has said all along about some of the rogue actors at the very tippy top of the FBI who are no longer there because they were fired and worse. Some of them were deemed to be leaking and lying, sexting each other, obviously with their tremendous biases against this president. So I think it confirms what he has said all along.
So she's referring to Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. They were not the top FBI officials that took part in this counterintelligence investigation. Like, again, these are two separate issues and they're purposely conflating the two in order to make people think that this is nothing more than some sort of partisan attack on Donald Trump. It is not. The FBI debated whether or not they wanted to launch this counterintelligence investigation. And the reason why they did decide to do it is because Trump himself was publicly incriminating himself, especially when he called in Russian officials into the Oval Office and started bragging about how he fired James Comey because of the Russia investigation.
Okay, it's time for a Young Turks guarantee, okay? I guarantee you that Kellyanne Conway, after Donald Trump goes down, will come back around and go, guys, I never believed any of that stuff. It was so obvious. That's why I had my husband, George Conway, constantly saying that what Trump was doing was wrong and shameful and pointing out why it was wrong. You think it was a coincidence that my husband was saying all those things publicly? No, that was my way of trying to warn everybody. So I was actually a good guy. I guarantee she says that after the fact. Now let's note right now, as things stand today, that's not true. So if she thinks she's being clever by doing that, well, that's not clever, that's not interesting, because you are aiding and abetting Donald Trump right now. Right now, every time you go on TV and you lie on his behalf and you cover up his crimes, you are guilty of aiding and abetting him. Just having your husband tweet every once in a while does not make it any better.
We got to take a break. When we come back, we will talk about another explosive report, this time by the Washington Post, that focused on how Trump has super secretive meetings with Vladimir Putin.
We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment. All right, back on the Young Turks, Cenk and Anna with you guys. Please share the stream wherever you're watching, because things are about to get more fiery. Also later in today's programs on TYT Network, on Rebel Headquarters, I'm going to talk to someone who does not agree with me about federal background checks on guns. So buckle up, brace for impact, okay? So that ought to be interesting. All right, now I'm going to read some member comments here. The mathematician says, you know, the sad part is that if the GOP didn't openly change their platform in 2015, which had all of us shaking our heads at the time, Trump might have gotten away with working for Russia because it could be explained away. And by the way, that is why I've said from day one that he will leave office in shame and not complete his first term, because he is not intelligent enough to do this cover up. And it doesn't actually take much. If you're already gotten to become president, you know how easy it is to do a cover up? Because you just say, it's an outrage. How could you investigate the president? An outrage. And he has all this executive privilege, etc. But he's too much of a bumbling fool. All right, Gabby Marita with an excellent point. I'm going to predict that at some point in the next week, Rudy Giuliani will say the words to the effect of, even if Trump is a Russian asset, that's not illegal. Probably live on Fox News, she added. I Am Sock says Jared Kushner has deep ties to Russia and Saudi Arabia. What a coincidence that the Trump administration lifts sanctions on Russia and helps bury the Khashoggi murder. These guys are two-bit criminals that have captured the US government. Anyway, last one, Valerie says, if I was that interpreter, I would fear a bit for my life. Valerie, you're not playing. We're gonna give you that full story right now. And I thought the same thing as I was reading the stories about the interpreters that have the notes, or were the only ones in the meetings with Trump and Putin. God, somebody get them some protection. I'm not remotely joking. So, all right, thank you guys. These are all member comments, tyt.com/join to become a member. All right, what's next, Anna?
Following a New York Times story involving the FBI's counterintelligence investigation into Trump and his ties to Russia, the Washington Post released a report indicating that Trump has been very secretive in his meetings with Vladimir Putin, so secretive that he actually, in some cases, prevents interpreters from being in those meetings. And in one case, in one meeting with Putin, he told the interpreter not to share the notes with anyone. So according to this Greg Miller report in the Washington Post, Trump has gone to extraordinary lengths to conceal details of his conversations with Putin, including on at least one occasion, taking possession of the notes of his own interpreter and instructing the linguist not to discuss what had transpired with other administration officials.
Can I just pause there? Sorry,
Sure.
Anna. That is extraordinary. No one has ever seen anything like that before. They went and talked to all the former officials. Hey, did you ever have a president say, hey, in this meeting, everybody get out of the room. I don't want any aides. I don't want anybody else listening in. I'm just gonna have a conversation with this foreign leader. Never, never. Grabbing the interpreter's notes? What? What? So, and does Trump do it with other officials? Maybe it's this thing, oh, he's got some sort of privacy fetish or whatever. And now, again, I don't mean to say it a fetish, we all should have privacy, but he's the president of the United States. He needs other people in the room. So let me quickly explain why he needs it. Number one, when you're negotiating or even having a conversation, not about a particular treaty or anything like that, but about your relationship with another country, you need to make sure things are clear. You need other people in the room to confirm that there was no miscommunication. That is super important. You need other people in the room taking notes so they can execute later on what you agreed on. That is true in business meetings, in small business meetings, let alone giant meetings between two of the most powerful nations on earth. When somebody says, take everybody else out of the room, they're about to discuss something that is secret about them, not in regards to the US. Other people have security clearance, they need to be in that room. Come on, man, how can you not see that he's obviously has some secret deal with Putin that he doesn't even want the interpreter to know. He doesn't want to get out in any way, shape, or form. And he doesn't, as far as we can tell, does not do it with other governments. It's not like, hey, I'm meeting with the leader of Canada, everybody get out of the room. No, it's just when it's Putin, everybody get out of the room, get out of the room. I gotta get my notes from my boss.
And the fact that he went the extra mile to talk to the interpreter and ensure that that person does not share the notes with anyone or talk about the meeting with anyone is also telling. Now that meeting took place in 2017 in Hamburg, but there were other meetings that were held in privacy. So US officials said that there was no detailed record, even in classified files, of Trump's face-to-face interactions with the Russian leader at 5 locations over the past 2 years. So in one instance, he was talking to Putin at length. No one else was part of that conversation. No one else was present. And there's no record of what they discussed, how they discussed it. And one of the concerns by his aides, some of whom spoke to the Washington Post in private or anonymously for this story, said, look, aides are hyper aware of possible manipulation that could take place. So it could be possible that Trump is being manipulated by Putin, but he's completely unaware that he's being manipulated. And so aides following these meetings will put together these reports that help to inform the president so he can move forward in the best way possible. But it's impossible to do it if no one's present and if all of these meetings are taking place in secrecy. One other thing that I thought was kind of amusing in this piece was the aides put together the reports and then they share it with Trump and administration officials. But oftentimes when he meets with world leaders, negative things are said about Trump and his administration officials. And so they're usually a little reluctant to share that information with Trump. But in the case of Putin, they don't even get the opportunity to do that.
So look, it got worse and worse as it went along. First in Hamburg, there's the interpreter and Rex Tillerson, who's the Secretary of State. Now, why did he allow Rex Tillerson to stay in the room? One of my original theories, which is still very much active, is that the former CEO of ExxonMobil, that's Rex Tillerson, was brought in to be Secretary of State, which is super weird, completely out of the blue, random, never heard of before, to be the Secretary of State. Why? Because there was a $500 billion deal with the Russians on oil, where ExxonMobil had the deal with the Russian oligarchs. So did they discuss that deal? And that's why Trump maybe felt comfortable with Rex Tillerson being in the room. So, and then Rex Tillerson, after that meeting and other things go awry, is like, I gotta get out of here. Because God knows what he said. And then he grabs the interpreter's notes. And if you're Tillerson, you're probably thinking, I thought it was gonna be subtle. But this idiot is just saying things in the room with Vladimir Putin with an interpreter. Oh my God. And that is why later, among the reasons why Tillerson called him an effing moron, okay? And then ran out of his administration with his hair on fire. So Tillerson's now gone. And now that's in Hamburg. In Helsinki, there is no Tillerson, no other official, only the 2 interpreters. And then it gets worse in other meetings where Putin and him go just talk one-on-one. Only Putin's interpreter is there. So we don't even have a US interpreter. Oh, come on, you're telling me that the president of the United States is going to meetings with any foreign government, let alone an adversary, without even using our interpreter. How do you know if his interpreter is interpreting things correctly? I mean, that is preposterous. Okay, even if you think that he has, I mean, at this point, really, you'd have to be mental to think he doesn't have some deal with the Russians. Absolutely insane. No, this is all normal. President's going, and don't even use interpreters when they're meeting with adversaries. It's just, you're wrong, it's not even close to true. But even if you think there is no deal, well, look at this guy's a buffoon. He was asking the Defense Department, it was a different story out today, hey, why can't we just blow up Iranian boats? Defense Secretary Jim Mattis is like, because it would then start a war. Do you want to start a war? No, I just want to blow up their boats. So at a bare minimum, with no one else in the room, do you know how easy it would be to manipulate and take advantage of this fool of fools? A guy who does not understand any of the consequences of his actions? What did he promise the Russians, even if he was on the level? And then is he going to follow through? And then if we don't follow through, does the word of the United States government mean anything? I mean, it is both deeply incompetent while also being deeply corrupt.
And when you take the fact that he insists on having these meetings in secrecy and couple it with all the other potentially incriminating aspects of Trump's relationship with Vladimir Putin, it draws a picture that's hard for Trump and his administration officials to deny. I mean, he has pushed for policies that are favorable to Russia, including making statements about how Russia is entitled to annexing Crimea. He has been very hesitant to impose sanctions on Russia. The fact that he fired Comey and openly said on various occasions that he did so because of the Russia investigation, once on television, and the second time when he met with Russian officials in the Oval Office. I mean, how is it that and by the way, every other day there's a Twitter storm, a tweet storm about how there was no collusion, even though there was nothing to provoke that reaction from Trump on Twitter. Just out of nowhere, he'll bring up Russia. It's incredible. Now, he was asked about these secret meetings, and he claims, no, I'm not hiding anything. Of course, he was on Judge Jeanine Pirro's show, and she's very favorable and complimentary to Trump, so he was in good company. But here's what he had to say about this Washington Post report.
Why not release the conversation that you had with President Putin in Helsinki, along with some other stuff that might involve the FISA, Broussard, and the whole lot of them?
Well, Janine, I would. I don't care. I mean, I had a conversation like every president does. You sit with the president of various countries. I do it with all countries. We had a great conversation. We were talking about Israel and securing Israel and lots of other things. And it was a great conversation. I'm not keeping anything under wraps. I couldn't care less. I mean, it's so ridiculous. These people make it up. Washington Post, that's basically the lobbyist for Amazon. You know, he uses that Bezos, who's got bigger problems than anybody right now.
God, what an embarrassment Judge Jeanine Pirro is. I mean, and the fact that she still uses the label judge in her show. But anyway.
So everything you said, as usual, is totally false and a lie on purpose. So on the Hamburg meeting, Rex Tillerson did a small readout of some of the topics that were considered. But then, okay, so let's say that you're a Secretary of State and you don't want to make it public. That's totally reasonable, okay? So you got to separate out things that make sense from ones that are extraordinary, right? But then within the Trump administration, his own national security advisor asked both Trump and Tillerson, hey, can you tell me what happened in the meeting so we could all prepare? Because I'm the national security advisor. I have to know what we said to the Russians. And even Tillerson refused to tell H.R. McMaster what happened. What? That is record-shatteringly unprecedented. That where the Secretary of State says to the National Security Advisor or the Defense Secretary or everyone in the government, no, I won't tell you what we talked to the Russians about. And then you go turn to the president and he's like, not only will I not tell you, I stole the interpreter's notes. You want to say he didn't steal them? He just grabbed them and he has a right to grab them. Okay, if you don't think that's curious or suspicious, there's something wrong with you. Your cognitive abilities need a little bit of repair, okay? And then, okay, like I said, it got worse every time. In Helsinki, there's only the interpreters. He doesn't even allow anybody else in. And again, he tells the interpreters, you are not allowed to say anything about this meeting to anyone. Then he only uses Putin's interpreter. He doesn't want any Americans in the room. Okay, so here are more cases. In 2017, there was a global conference and only Putin's interpreter was present. That's one of the ones that I'm referring to. And then they had another conversation at the G20 summit in Buenos Aires last month. And again, Trump refused to have anyone else. He just would pull Putin aside with Putin's interpreter, and they'd have a conversation where they were making their, well, they're obviously having a literal secret conversation that our president does not want anyone else in the United States government to know about. Just let that sink in. The president does not want his own Secretary of State, his Secretary of Defense, or his National Security Advisor to know what he secretly told the Russian president. Okay, if you still think there's no secret deal, you're not that bright. Okay, so sorry, but that's the reality. And by the way, we know who the interpreter in Helsinki is. Somebody get her some protection. I'm not remotely joking. Luckily, we don't know the identity of the interpreter in Hamburg. I hope the FBI and the special counsel know his or her identity, but do not, please, other media organizations, don't reveal their names. I'm not kidding. And look, you might say, hey, as journalists, it's our job to find out, and I hear you, but you're putting their lives in danger. So Putin has people assassinated on a regular basis. If there's only one other person in the room that heard what Trump and Putin are talking about, their lives are definitely in danger.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to switch gears and talk about the story that Cenk referenced, Iranian ships and how Trump just wants to sink them.
Oh God, all right. If you haven't heard the story and your blood's not already boiling, that'll set you over the top.